What's going on, gardeners? It's Sunday, May 7th, and it is a gorgeous afternoon here on the southeastern coast of North Carolina. And on today's video, I'm going to share with you 4 mistakes you may be making that are killing your tomato production and how to fix it.
If you're new to the channel, please subscribe and hit the bell to receive new video notifications, and check out our Amazon store and spread shop links in the video description for everything I use in my garden and awesome custom designed apparel and other gear. Your support is greatly appreciated.
The first mistake that many gardeners make is that they don't fertilize their tomato plants enough. If you're relying on the soil to do the work for you, or you're only using things like homemade compost and you're not adopting a regular, consistent fertilizing routine, there is no way that your tomatoes are reaching peak performance and you're leaving a ton of performance on the table. The modern cultivars of tomatoes that we grow in our vegetable gardens today in no way, shape, or form resemble the old wild types of tomatoes that came about naturally from nature. We as humans have spent so much time selectively breeding and crossing various varieties of tomatoes to manufacture plants with huge production and huge fruits that the fertilizer demand of modern tomatoes is just enormous. Then we take these super demanding tomato plants and we plant them in high density, in strange, perfectly neat patterns, in rows that you will never find anywhere in nature. And when you add all of these things up, there is no way that the soil itself can keep up with the nutrient demands of the plants. Unless you're trucking in huge amounts of compost, simply composting is not enough. You have to add external fertilizer if you want good production. The way I like to fertilize my tomato plants is every 2 weeks, that's twice a month. I like to give them some organic all-purpose fertilizer, something around the 555 NPK, but as long as all the NPK numbers are close together and represented, it's close enough. It can be a 454, 444, you get the point. And I also like supplementing it with bone meal, which is a fantastic source of organic phosphorus, which will slowly break down and will help the plants develop more flowers and more fruit while strengthening the roots. And by the way, if you're interested in any of the fertilizer products that I'm using in this video, they will all be linked in my Amazon storefront down in the video description, and I'll also place some direct links as well just to make things easy for you. The way I fertilize my tomatoes is every 2 weeks I come and I pull away the layer of mulch that I have around the plants, and then I sprinkle about 1 tablespoon of the organic all-purpose fertilizer around the base of the tomato plant, as well as half to 1 tablespoon of the bone meal. And then once it is added, I like to take my fingertips and lightly work it into the top inch or so of the soil, and then I will simply place the mulch layer back on top. Then once the organic granulated fertilizers have been placed around the bases of the plant and the mulch has been put back, I like to water them in with a water-soluble fertilizer blend that I mix in watering cans. And my favorite things to use are Alaska Fish Fertilizer 511 and Jack's All-Purpose 20-20-20 water-soluble fertilizer. I personally think this is the best of the synthesized water-soluble fertilizers, and I have great results with it. So what I do is I take my 2-gallon watering cans and I mix this Jack's 20-20-20 in at a concentration of 1 tablespoon per gallon, and then I supplement each watering can with about a 2-second pour, which equates to about 2 to 3 tablespoons of the Alaska Fish Fertilizer. After I mix them all together, I then take them over to my garden beds and I water all around the plants. Each 2-gallon watering can is usually enough to water about 6 to 8 plants. The second mistake you may be making that is killing your tomato production is you are giving your plants the wrong kind of fertilizer, mainly fertilizers that are too high in nitrogen at flowering time. In terms of overall plant biology, nitrogen is the macronutrient that is most responsible for leafy green growth on a plant. Phosphorus is most responsible for the flowering and fruiting cycle, as well as the development of roots, and potassium is most responsible for cellular division and the overall metabolic health of the plant. So if what you're feeding your tomato plants is something like Miracle-Gro all-purpose fertilizer or only fish emulsion, you are probably giving your tomato plants way too much nitrogen. Miracle-Gro all-purpose fertilizer has an NPK ratio of 24:8:16. So despite the name, it is actually a high nitrogen fertilizer and is a terrible all-purpose fertilizer. Similarly, while fish fertilizer is chock full of vitamins and minerals that are great for the overall health of the plant, if this is all you give them, it has an NPK NPK of 511, which is a very high nitrogen fertilizer. So while these fertilizers are great if you're growing something like lettuce where you really want to eat the leafy green growth, or you're just starting out with seedlings that are very small and you want them to grow up very quickly and put on a lot of leafy green growth, once plants start entering the flowering cycle, these high nitrogen fertilizers can actually discourage flowering and fruiting and will prefer the plant grow leafy green growth instead. So basically, you will be growing foliage, not fruits. Once your vegetables start entering the flowering and fruiting cycle, it is critical that you switch to a balanced fertilizer like this Jax 20-20-20 because it has an overall nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium ratio of 1:1:1. It is not a strong nitrogen fertilizer, even though it still has a good bit of nitrogen in it. And when you switch to a balanced fertilizer like this, you're basically telling the plant to have a very balanced metabolism and to split up its energy into leafy green growth and the flowering and fruiting cycle. So that will generally give you a balanced and healthy plant that will continue to grow larger, but it won't negatively impact the fruiting cycle. However, there is another strategy that can help you grow even more flowers on your fruiting plants and even your fruit trees. What I actually like to do is, when I see the first flowers start to develop on my tomato plants, pepper plants, eggplants, cucumbers, any of my flowering fruits and vegetables, I like to hit them with a dose of this 10-30-20 blossom booster because the high phosphorus helps boost the flowers. I've seen this firsthand year after year. I really think it makes a big difference. And earlier, when I showed you myself watering my tomato plants, I actually used this fertilizer in the watering cans. If you can't find the Jax Blossom Booster in stores or you don't want to order online, a good substitute is the Miracle-Gro Flower Food 15-30-15. It works similarly, but like I said, I also have all of these items linked in my Amazon storefront down in the video description underneath the soluble fertilizers list, and I've placed direct links in the video description to all of these items. And if you're wondering if it's still safe to give your plants fish fertilizer when they start to flower, the answer is yes, as long as you're blending them with the other fertilizers. If all you gave them was fish fertilizer, it would be too much nitrogen. However, when you blend it with things like 20-20-20 or 10-30-20, the much weaker organic fertilizers are usually a drop in the bucket when it comes to the actual nitrogen content, so you won't be throwing off the ratio all that much, but you will still be adding all of the great micronutrients, the vitamins and minerals that are in the whole fish product. So I love blending the fertilizers together for this reason. The third mistake you may be making that is killing your tomato production is you are pruning your determinate style tomatoes. When you watch online tutorials on how to prune tomato plants, they usually tell you to remove a lot of the suckers on your tomato plants in order to control their vertical growth and promote airflow. However, those tutorials often fail to say that is only true for indeterminate tomatoes. If you are growing determinate tomatoes and you do that, you will not have a harvest. Indeterminate tomato plants, like the plant you see right here, grow as a vine. So you can grow them up a trellis or a piece of twine like you see right here. So for that reason, it's often beneficial to remove some of the suckers. Otherwise, the plants can grow out of control and they will be very difficult to actually support, and that lack of airflow from all of the foliage and vegetation can actually help promote disease. So when you remove the suckers, they actually become easier to manage and less prone to getting some kind of disease. That is not the case with determinate tomato plants. Determinate tomato plants grow to a predetermined height, hence the name determinate. They only get to be about 2 to 4 feet tall, depending on the variety that you're growing. They grow as a bush, not a vine. So all of these suckers have to be maintained because this plant is only going to get to be about that tall, and all of the flowers come off of the suckers. So if I remove any of the suckers on this little tiny stout bush style plant, I'm going to remove all of the areas where they will flower and I will get no fruit at all. For that reason, determinate tomato plants, generally speaking, shouldn't be pruned at all. You never want to remove any of the suckers. The only time it's okay to prune a tomato plant is the leaf nodes that come off 90 degrees from the main stem if they touch the ground at the very bottom of the plant. You don't want to remove anything other than the foliage that may be draping on the ground. The only other exception may be if you're starting to get a little bit of disease on your tomato plant, I'm starting to see the signs of early blight form on some of these varieties because it's already getting hot and humid here where I live in North Carolina. So you can remove a leaf here and there that may have disease on them, but again, generally speaking, your determinate tomato plants start to naturally die back once the fruit starts to ripen. So they usually require very little disease management because their natural lifespan is often shorter than it takes for the diseases to kill them off. And finally, if you're growing tomato plants from the Dwarf Tomato Project, regardless of if they're labeled as indeterminate, semi-determinate, or determinate, I find you need to treat all of these as a determinate style tomato. They tend to top off after about 2 to 3 feet in height, and they produce all of their flowers and fruit before that. They won't really grow much after. So for all intents and purposes, treat your Dwarf Tomato Project tomatoes like a determinate. So it is very important to know if you're growing an indeterminate or determinate tomato before you start pruning your tomato plants. Now, if you're growing your tomatoes from seed, the seed packet always says whether they are indeterminate or determinate. If you bought your plants as transplants and you only know the variety name and it doesn't say on the tomato tag what they are, you're going to have to Google that variety and figure that out. Every single seed website that carries that variety will say in the description if it's a determinate or an indeterminate. And finally, if you're growing tomato plants and you don't even know the variety name, then you're going to have to basically wait until they're 2 feet tall, because by then it should be evident whether they're growing as a vine or a bush. If they are not growing as a vine, do not prune them. And the fourth mistake you may be making that is killing your tomato production is you are pruning your indeterminate tomatoes to the wrong number of main stems relative to your tomato plant spacing. And I kind of blame the internet for a lot of this. Most of us are growing our tomato garden vertically, and for good reason. That keeps the tomato vines off the ground where they are more susceptible to pests and diseases. However, indeterminate tomato plants can grow into unruly vines. So for that reason, a lot of gardeners want to manage the total number of main stems. Otherwise, the plant can become too large and too difficult to manage, and it can spread disease and hide pests. But there are so many guides out there on the internet that will show you how to prune your indeterminate tomatoes. Some guides say prune them to a single stem. Others say let them bush out, because if you prune off too many of the stems, you're going to get less flowers and therefore less fruit. But what you really need to understand is you need to train your tomato plants for the infrastructure and the plant space that you're actually growing them to. You can't just go out and say, I'm going to single stem this plant or double stem this plant, or I'm going to let it vine out of control, because that could backfire and blow up in your face. You need to understand why you're pruning your tomato plants the way you are. The reason why you want to prune your tomato plants to a certain number of stems is because you want to maximize the output of your garden per square foot of the garden, while also allowing the plants to have enough airflow that they don't prematurely contract disease. So a lot of gardeners that train their tomato plants to a single stem are doing it because they are only spacing each tomato plant about 12 to 18 inches. So because they are spacing them so close together, they can prune their plants to one single main stem and still get great production because there are so many plants. Now me, on the other hand, I give my indeterminate tomato plants 2 feet of spacing. So if I train them only to a single stem, I would really harm my overall production, because I'd have one plant here, one plant way over there. I'd have big gaps in between the plants, so I'd get a lot less fruit. So what I usually do is I train my indeterminate tomato plants to 2 main stems, because I find 2 main stems are going to double basically the amount of flowers on my plant. And because I'm spacing them every 2 feet, 2 main stems per plant gives me the perfect amount of production per square foot, while still allowing for enough airflow that they don't prematurely contract disease. If your tomato plants are spaced even wider than mine, then you'll probably want to allow your indeterminate tomato plants to grow to even more main stems. Otherwise, you're going to get very poor production per square foot of your garden. If you're spacing these plants 3 to 4 feet apart in all directions and you're only training them to one single main stem, you're going to have enormous square footage of your garden where nothing is growing, and you're going to get pretty poor production overall. So it's really important that you consider these things. The more main stems you give your tomato plant, the more flowers flowers it's going to have, but generally the smaller the fruit is going to be, the less airflow, and therefore the more disease pressure. But on that note, if you live in a climate where disease pressure isn't really a problem because maybe you have dry summers and low humidity, it may be in your best interest to just let the tomato plants grow as many main stems as possible. Let them sucker all over the place, because if you are not susceptible to disease in your climate, then why give your plants more airflow? If disease isn't an issue, as long as you're happy with the size of the fruits that you're getting from the plants, why remove any of the suckers? Removing suckers only means less flowers and less fruit. So you need to consider all of these things when you actually start removing the suckers on your tomato plant. There is no one-size-fits-all number of main stems. That's all going to depend on your unique situation, how large you want the fruit, how much room you have to grow the plants, how disease prone you are in your unique area, etc. So consider that before you start doing any kind of pruning activities. And that right there are 4 mistakes you may be making growing tomatoes that are killing your tomato production. So everybody, I sure hope you found this video helpful. If you did, please make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and please ring that notification bell so you're notified when we release more videos like these. If you're curious about any of the products that I featured in this video, they are all linked down below in my Amazon storefront in the video description, and I also place some direct links in the video description as well for your convenience. And while you're there, check out my spread shop for custom merch if you want to support the channel. If you have any questions, please ask them down in the comments section below, and I will do my best to answer them. Thank you all so much for watching, and I hope to see all of you again on the next video. Oh, Dale, Dad got you a brand new Nerf ball because you killed your other one. It lasted almost 5 entire months, which is really good for you. So here's another one. This is Dale's favorite toy in the world. And go, Daley! He's gonna go crazy. He's gonna go crazy. And there he goes.